You've reached Kim Wexler. Please leave a message.
My head sticking out from a low-flying cloud.
Seriously, when the going gets tough, you don't want a criminal lawyer, right? You want a criminal lawyer.
Sunshine, sweet and clear as can be.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen Better Call Saul, or, just to be safe, Breaking Bad, you may want to before watching this video. Despite their shaky track record in modern pop culture, there's no denying that the allure of a prequel series is enthralling. Sci-fi worlds have the opportunity to depict rich histories that previously existed as fascinating lore bits. Fantasy settings can detail the grand legends the original works referenced. Or maybe it's as simple as wanting to see additional adventures of a character who met their demise. In 2015, Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan and writer Peter Gould joined forces to create Better Call Saul, a follow-up prequel to the AMC crime thriller which concluded in 2013. Now, Breaking Bad is widely considered one of the greatest television series of all time, alongside all-stars like the first 8 seasons of The Simpsons, The Wire, The Sopranos, and Arliss, so it's safe to say Better Call Saul had some mighty big shoes to fill. It's also safe to say that the show rose to the occasion. I'll just come right out and say it, at the time of this recording, Better Call Saul is my favorite show I've ever seen. Will that opening admission prevent comments asking, why did you make a super long video on the series if you hate it so much? I doubt it. So without further ado, let's jump in. Is it Christmas? Is it Kwanzaa? Better. It's slip and fall season. This is Better Call Saul.
Do you feel doomed? Have opponents of freedom wrongly intimidated you? Maybe they told you that you're in serious trouble and there's nothing you can do about it. I'm Saul Goodman, and I'm here to tell you that they're wrong. It's never too late for justice. Better
Call Saul follows the career of struggling lawyer Jimmy McGill, the man who will one day do business as Saul Goodman, play a part in Walter White's drug empire, and eventually be forced to go on the lam when their meth empire is finally busted by the feds. Hey, I warned you about Breaking Bad spoilers. Aside from a curmudgeonly parking lot attendant, who I'm sure is just some nobody, his interactions with Albuquerque's legal world puts him in frequent contact with our other 3 supporting characters at the law firm of Hamlin McGill. Kim Wexler, an attorney whom Jimmy has a flirty relationship with, who bootstrapped her way through the bar exam alongside Jimmy when they were co-workers in HHM's mailroom. Howard Hamlin, the old money named partner at HHM who puts on a friendly face but who Jimmy suspects also secretly looks down on him. And lastly, Chuck McGill, the other named partner at HHM and Jimmy's older brother. While Jimmy spent his youth pulling cons in Cicero, Chuck was the responsible sibling who built up a firm and made a name for himself in ABQ's legal community. However, with Chuck falling ill to an unusual malady over the past 2 years, Jimmy, now more than ever, has been forced to step into the role of responsible sibling to care for his brother. And I do mean unusual. You hear they're making a Breaking Bad prequel, Jimmy gradually letting go of his morals and building his criminal network, Mike going from retired cop to fixer, and cameos from Breaking Bad characters running the gamut from minor to major. That's about what everybody expected. I don't think anybody had electromagnetic hypersensitivity on their bingo cards. In fact, unless you're a student of rare and uncanny disorders, odds are this series was your first introduction to the psychosomatic condition. But this out-of-left-field allergy to electricity bore tremendous fruit as the series went along, enabling both striking visuals and unique character beats. The series was a bit ahead of its time in tackling mental health subjects, while also avoiding the common pitfall of being a Hollywoodized version of common ailments.
Take off the space blanket. I didn't do anything wrong.
It has nothing to do with that. It was your phone.
Take off the space blanket.
Better Call Saul has a solid roster of characters to work with, but in the first season, Howard, Chuck, and Kim are all written pretty one-note. The sitcom-style arch-nemesis, the disapproving familial mentor, and the girl our lead can both flirt with and bounce ideas off of. And at the end of the day, that's really Jimmy's arc for the season. coming to the sometimes comforting, sometimes horrifying realization that none of his personal relationships are what he believed them to be. While the development between the brothers McGill throughout the season appears to be Jimmy gently easing Chuck back into his legal career, Jimmy is devastated to discover his brother has actually secretly been attempting to ease Jimmy out of his legal career.
You're not a real lawyer.
I'm what?
You're not a real lawyer. University of American Samoa, for Christ's sake?
It's such a gut punch, because even on a rewatch, seeing Chuck overcome his symptoms and make the first strides toward reclaiming his life is heartwarming. And then you remember the green-eyed motivations that make him tick and feel just as sick at his betrayal as the characters. Oh, look how happy he is. Returning to the office for the first time in 2 years. I'm so proud of you, Chuck. Hey, wait a minute. Fuck you, Chuck! The revelation of Chuck's behind-the-scenes scheming means Jimmy's been putting undue blame on Howard for some of the more obstructive actions attributed to HHM's partners, now that he knows which partner really had it out for him. And Jimmy begins to realize Kim is more than just a fellow traveler, she's a potential partner in crime. Fortunately, the supporting cast don't just flip to one-note characters in the opposite direction going forward. Chuck isn't simply the Cain to Jimmy's Abel. As Jimmy's legal tactics become increasingly legally and morally questionable, the writers very smartly leave it up to the audience to determine how much of it is Chuck accurately assessing his brother's character, and how much of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that would have never come to pass had the two gotten along. Hamlin may have been revealed as unduly hated by Jimmy, but after the Chuck motive twist, he doesn't become effete Ron Swanson overnight. He's still capable of prickish, vindictive antics from time to time. And Kim is more than just the dream law partner and wife material who wants to rein in Jimmy's antics. At times, she enables them, allowing the series to explore questions like, is she bad for him? Is he bad for her? Or are they good for each other but bad for everyone else around them? And the most unsettling question of all, how unfortunate will her pre-Breaking Bad fate be? However, there's an issue with all these character developments and revelations. I say that they're the arc of the season, but they all happen in the second to last episode. Actually, Kim's doesn't even really occur until the season 2 premiere. It leads to a similar issue I had with the first season of Boardwalk Empire. The first season of Better Call Saul feels less like a first season of television and more like a 10-hour-long pilot, setting us up for the real show starting next season. The feud between the McGill brothers, Jimmy and Kim's relationship, and Mike's foray into Albuquerque's criminal underworld. Since Kim and Mike, who I'll get to in a moment, are firmly side characters in Better Call Saul's freshman year, that means Season 1 is the Jimmy McGill show, and by extension, the Bob Odenkirk show.
I would love to go there, but let's face it, that's never going to happen. None of us is ever leaving this godforsaken wasteland.
Bob steps up to the plate and turns in a great performance, but occupying roughly 85% of the screen time of a 10-episode season with a single character is no mean feat, and the writer's strain can show at points. The writers go to the well of Jimmy making pop culture references that nobody in the room follows a few too many times, which made me a bit nervous starting the show out. If this is a more lighthearted dramedy than its predecessor, might have to work on Mr. Goodman's zingers a bit, lads. Stylish as they may be, some of the show's atmosphere-establishing montages can feel long-winded. Notably in episodes where there is already a lack of meat on the narrative bone. Breaking Bad really did get to the action, both in the literal sense and the disturbing life and death ethical conundrum sense, right off the bat. But I know with hindsight, Better Call Saul is going for its own thing, and isn't trying to be Breaking Bad 2. Which brings me to my last major issue with the first season of Better Call Saul. There's less of an inherent draw to come back next week to see how the down-on-his-luck lawyer will pay his bills, compared to how the terminally ill school teacher will dispose of the 2 men he just murdered after crashing his mobile meth lab in the desert. So, in an effort to hook viewers at the end of the pilot, the writers had Jimmy run afoul of Breaking Bad antagonist Tuco Salamanca, basically trying to dupe everyone into thinking they were watching Breaking Bad 2, using the second episode as bait.
I cut their throats, and then I pull their live tongues through the slits! Bitch!
Or you could give them black eyes.
Black eyes?
For what it's worth, Jimmy getting dragged into the lair of one of Breaking Bad's most dangerous foes is quite the cliffhanger, but the whole endeavor has the typical TV pilot problem of raising the stakes way too high, too early on, which only serves to undercut future events that should feel like a whole new level of danger. So when 4 years later Mr. McGill finds himself held at gunpoint by the cartel in the middle of the desert in Bagman, instead of thinking about the gravity of the situation, in the back of my mind I'm thinking, oh shit, this isn't the first time. Or hell, forget life and death dragged out to the desert stakes, the second episode undercuts the tension of interacting with Tuco that Mike's second season storyline will play with. Mike spends the series contending with the Salamancas, a cartel family who come in 3 waves of escalating terror. Tuco, frightening in his unpredictability, Hector, capable of making people offers they can't refuse, and Lalo, charismatic cat burglar criminal mastermind. But Tuco's only frightening in his unpredictability on paper. In practice, the character is largely played for laughs in the first season of Better Call Saul. Pair that with his lie detector tactic in season 2 that just makes me think of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he never really recaptures the sense of danger he commanded in the original series. So while characters make desperate plans to get Tuco off the streets for their own safety, I'm like, what, him? He's just like this silly little guy.
The task force is designated Operation Kingbreaker.
Kingbreaker. That makes me the king! Woohoo! Can I?
So our second episode introduction to the crime thriller elements of Better Call Saul is not indicative of the tone these cartel shenanigans will later have. It's certainly not a bad episode, but let's face it, it's no Grilled, as much as I get the impression it would like to be. And it's not indicative of the Jimmy McGill storylines that will follow for the next 4.5 seasons either. Fortunately, after that shaky second step, Better Call Saul gets into a comfortable groove, exhibiting a natural flow from episode to episode. Not so much nail-biting cliffhangers, but logical follow-ups that continue to expand and explore the legal and criminal world of New Mexico. Tuco's right-hand man Nacho learns Jimmy wants to represent Crooked County Treasurer Craig Kettleman, and instead proposes they steal his stolen cash since he'll have no recourse. Jimmy warns Craig of Nacho's impending heist, and the Kettlemans vanish. Nacho forces Jimmy to clear his name when he's charged with kidnapping, and after finding the Kettlemans, he winds up with a rather handsome bribe to keep details of their disappearance a secret. Gotta admit, Betsy Kettleman does it for me. She's a bit of a atypical fictional crush. I'm not the kind of guy who's into crazy, dominant women, but I'm often pegged as one. Jimmy uses the bribe as seed money, seemingly in a revenge plot to steal HHM's business, but actually as part of a publicity stunt to become a local hero. And even the way the season breaks the flow of Jimmy's burgeoning business has, well, a sort of flow to it. With a growing specialization in elder law, he hands his business card to none other than Mike Ehrmantraut, the parking lot attendant at the courthouse. As Jimmy drives off, we take a break from Jimmyland to enter 5-0, Mike's Season 1 focus episode.
You know what happened. The question is, can you live with it?
Better Call Saul took its time integrating Mike into the show's format, which I think was a smart tactic to prevent this from just feeling like 2 different shows about 2 different characters that happen to share a time slot. Some people level that complaint at the series as a whole, but I only found it really noticeable in the 4th season, where Jimmy and Mike only interact in a single scene of very little narrative or thematic consequence. So Mike starts off as basically cameos, then gets 5-0, and finally we wrap up with him doing bodyguard work for woeful pill peddler Daniel Wormold, the world's worst crook paired off with the world's best. More or less just to get the ball rolling on Mike becoming one of the show's leads. Before we get to that, let's go back to 5-0. And I mean, it's a show stealer, detailing Mike's history as a dirty cop and how his son met his demise when his innocent soul got tied up in that same crooked way of life. A suitable backstory for a beloved character that retains the man's criminal roots without being too maudlin, saccharine, or on the nose, all anchored by Jonathan Banks' exceptional performance. He does a fantastic job, but enjoy it while it lasts. The man is playing Mike Ehrmantraut, after all, so season after season he gets less and less opportunities to show off his impressive acting chops and flashy exchanges and monologues like these ones. That's just the nature of the character. He's gruff, reserved, and plays his cards close to the vest. What are you gonna do?
Look, don't let Mr. Ehrmantraut's dancing eyes and bubbly, bon vivant personality fool you. He's actually, believe it or not, somewhat taciturn.
Shall I fan you gently so you don't go into shock?
So 5-0's a standout, Pimento's a standout. Every episode of the first season has that ends in O naming convention, by the way, except for Jell-O, which isn't Jell-O, it's Alpine Shepherd Boy, but you can see why they tried to call it Jell-O before Jell-O, the Jell-O company, said hell no. Maybe the lady who owns Walter White's house in real life also runs Jell-O's marketing department? I don't know. Our last O is Marco, in which Jimmy hands over a massive class action case against the Sandpiper chain of retirement homes to HHM after learning of Chuck's deception to return to his old conman ways back in Cicero. After his pal Marco dies to, I don't know, consumption, Jimmy returns to ABQ, with a juicy job offer at the prestigious law firm Davis & Main on the table, offering him an opportunity to get back in on the Sandpiper class action. Jimmy's prospects are finally looking up, but between Chuck's disapproval, the fresh memories of fun times with Marco, and a worry that a career with D&M will turn things with Miss Wexler strictly professional, Jimmy turns the firm down. On his way out of the lot, he reflects on a scheme he and Mike ran earlier in the season, stealing the Kettleman's stolen bucks and sending it to the DA to get them a favorable deal against their wishes, when they could have gotten away with keeping it all for themselves.
I know what stopped me. And you know what? It's never stopping me again.
Hell yeah. No more Mr. Nice Guy. This is the moment Jimmy McGill became Saul Goodman. Right? Well, no. Not really. Despite his bold words, Jimmy isn't nearly ready to jump off the slippery slope just yet. Better Call Saul is going for a slower burn than that, and in the long run, is all the stronger for it. But pair that powerful statement with the smoke on the water outro, and that ending still gets audiences hyped for some exciting moral flexibility in the following season, even if it's not quite as surface-level thrilling as you're likely to picture it. Sort of like all the advertising for Breaking Bad's 4th season. This season, Walter White's not in danger, he is the danger. And then he spends 10 episodes acting like a bratty child and getting beat up. We're speeding off to season 2, and with Jimmy deciding not to hoard all the screen time in the show's sophomore year, I can promise you this much. Things are going to get colorful.
Do you remember how long you studied for that bar? How hard you worked? All that effort. You're just gonna toss it away?
That's the sunk cost fallacy.
Wait, the what?
The fallacy of sunk cost.
Better Call Saul kicks things off in season 2 by going, listen, we're not going to jerk you around anymore. This ain't no New Girl, this ain't no How I Met Your Mother. No more will they, won't they. Jimmy and Kim are getting together. We're doing this. After vouching for Jimmy to get him the Davis & Main job, Kim gets him to reconsider the offer. And in the process, he ropes her into a con to get Breaking Bad alum and vanity-plated douchebag Ken to pick up their bar tab. In the afterglow of a successful scam, the two hook up. But realizing he can't stay in Never Neverland forever, Jimmy relents and takes the job. And with that, BCS branches out. Now with 3 leads instead of 1. Jimmy and Kim working at their respective firms, and Mike running a bodyguarding side hustle to help his daughter-in-law move out of her terrible neighborhood, with all 3 sharing more or less equal screen time. But more than seeing Jimmy finally make the big leagues, or McWexler becoming official, of course, the main event the audience is waiting for at the start of season 2 is Chuck and Jimmy inevitably crossing paths again, now that Chuck's animosity is on full display. The ominous build-up to their reunion expertly inverts the way Chuck's EHS is presented to the audience. In the first season, when Jimmy was Chuck's caretaker, his sensitivity to electricity was a weakness. He had to be meticulously accommodated, which was a tedious hassle and made him frail in the eyes of both his associates and his opposition. But now that he's Jimmy's adversary, Chuck's ability to send HHM's drones scampering to ready the room for his arrival is more of a power move. No pun intended. It's almost like Chuck's grand entrance is being heralded by him sapping all the power out of the room personally, like he's some sort of energy vampire. Chuck is instantly disapproving and wary of Jimmy's inexplicable success with client outreach. Rightly so, as he's been using underhanded tactics, and Kim, Clifford Main, and the rest of the D&M offices are short to follow. Jimmy's storyline in season 2 is somewhat rare for television. There's plenty of examples of TV shows about nightmarish day jobs anyone would despise, but the high-paying dream gig that winds up being incompatible with you, denying you real responsibility, and gradually grinding you down, that's generally less examined. The multiple hints that Jimmy has a pathologic need to push boundaries and is doomed to not fit in this firm, are cute if not exactly subtle, and his eventual scheme to retain his signing bonus by getting himself fired without cause for being the most unfathomably annoying coworker in the universe is the greatest montage in a series of great montages. The Davis and Main staff were just overbearing enough for audiences to understand why Jimmy would pull that dirty maneuver on them, while still also being nice enough that we kind of feel as scummy as Jimmy for enjoying it so much.
Hey, Cliff, for what it's worth, I think you're a good guy.
For what it's worth, I think you're an asshole.
I've definitely worked one or two jobs in my life that were very, shall we say, post-commercial Davis and Main, and projecting your frustrations onto Jimmy's quest to leave them holding the bag is eminently relatable. But there are certainly episodes throughout the first half of Season 2 where, even if you do know it's headed toward the bagpipe rainbow suit don't flush the John payoff ploy, Jimmy has a lot less going on than his co-stars Kim and Mike. If it's not a life experience you've had, I can understand how this storyline might drag a bit. Know how I know? Because watching the show when it first aired, I hadn't had an experience like this yet, and it did. However, Jimmy's scheme to convince the cops that Daniel Wormhold has been selling fetish material rather than drugs is one of Better Call Saul's most hilarious scenes in his entire run. And his explosive verbal sparring with Chuck in the aptly named Gloves Off, finally breaking half a season of passive-aggressive tension, shoots enough adrenaline into his storyline to tide me over until his amusing termination.
If I were impeding the career of one of my employees for the purpose of compelling you to do something against your will, that would be extortion.
Yeah, it would. So?
You want me to commit a felony? Because that's what you do, right?
It's not smooth sailing over at HHM either. Both Kim and Howard take hits to their reputation when the lawyer they vouched for turns out to be a loose cannon, and Howard burdens Kim with an endless stream of menial paperwork as punishment. Rather than start scoping out the emergency exits, Kim redoubles her efforts to win her boss's support, eventually reeling in a whale of a client, Mesa Verde Bank and Trust. This does little to get her out of the doghouse, so both the swanky firm of Schweikart and Coakley and the recently unemployed Jimmy attempt to poach her. Unwilling to be professionally affiliated with the cavalier Mr. McGill, and realizing Schweikart and Coakley is ultimately going to be more of the same, after a subtle moment where she accidentally calls her interviewer Howard. Really nice touch, by the way, that they didn't punctuate that moment with dramatic music and her staring off into space, so we get it. They trusted us to be smart enough, yeah, the audience got it. Instead, Kim proposes a third option. She and Jimmy will start two separate practices, but share office expenses to make the venture feasible. With Mesa Verde as their sole focus, and Jimmy going through so many elderly clients he puts Max Bialystock to shame, the couple's independent venture quickly thrives. These are the halcyon days of Wexler McGill. Much like the second season of Breaking Bad, there's that infectious energy of watching characters strike out on their own and build up a small business. Though, of course, it's even more straightforward to root for them and less ethically concerning, since they're cooking up wills and bank expansions, not meth. There's a pervading sense of optimism to the season as the pair break the shackles that confined them when the series began. Jimmy no longer has to make a half-hearted show of appeasing the authority figures who disapprove of his aggressive salesmanship, finally able to act like himself without constant shaming. And Kim is no longer turning in excellent work out of obligation to a firm that once believed in her and supported her during her schooling, but has long since abandoned its interest in her professional development. Of course, there are haunting clouds hanging over this period of hope and prosperity. The black and white cold opens of each season remind us of the crimes Jimmy is destined to commit in Breaking Bad. In time, you're gonna pay. And it's surprising how time slips away. Another cloud is just rewatching the show now that all 6 seasons have aired. We all know Jimmy and Kim's legal careers and relationship are going to meet an ugly end, but I was honestly unprepared for just how affecting the traumatic endgame would be.
There's really no need to...
Oh my God! Oh my God!
And in the present, a thunderless cloud is stirring. Chuck McGill isn't going to let his brother's latest venture get off the ground without a fight. Chuck revealed himself as a backstabber in the penultimate episode of Season 1, and while we as an audience are inherently sympathetic to Jimmy because he's our eyes-in character, his sordid, sunroof-shitting past at least let us know where Chuck's mistrust might be coming from. Season 2 peppers moments, in both present day and flashback, that establish that even though Chuck may have accurately assessed his brother's impulsive desire to subvert the law for both fun and profit, he's right about Jimmy for the wrong reasons. In his first scene of the season, Howard breaks the news to him like, "Hey, just thought I should be the one to tell you this. Jimmy got a job." Howard's letting him know his brother is on partner track with a signing bonus and benefits with the tone you'd tell someone they found your brother dead in a crack house with 6 bullets in him. Chuck can't even bring himself to go back to playing the piano after Howard leaves. The news just crushes him. He relishes Jimmy's floundering at Davis and Maine. "I don't want to say I told you so I'll shout it through cupped hands." And even attempts to take the opportunity to plant seeds of doubt in the mind of his brother's girlfriend, sitting Kim down for an awkward heart-to-heart that's meant to portray Jimmy as a grifter unaware of how much pain he causes to the ones around him. But all he really accomplishes is letting his mask slip and showing Kim Wexler how nuts he is.
He ended up having to sell. 6 months later, he was dead. At the funeral, no one cried harder than Jimmy.
Chuck is a fantastic love-to-hate villain. Michael McKean really brings the character to life. He's understandable, nasty, manipulative. Guys like the hater to end all haters, the apex hater. As someone who wastes a lot of his free time trash-talking television shows that have been off the air for a decade, I can respect that. So when Chuck sees an opportunity to torpedo his brother's dream life, he swoops in, snatching Mesa Verde away from Kim and putting their solo practices in financial jeopardy. His sales pitch to Mesa Verde leaves him incapacitated, since he had to play pretend like he and electricity get along just fine through the whole meeting, and Jimmy takes the opportunity to win Kim's client back for her, swapping the address of Mesa Verde's next branch from 1261 to 1216 while Chuck is indisposed. This seeming transpositional error works as intended, but Chuck correctly deduces that there was chicanery involved.
I can't stand the fact that my own brother stabbed me in the back. I can't stand the fact that you've deceived and ruined this fine young woman.
Ruined? What is this, the 1840s?
Chuck scours the land of enchantment for proof of Jimmy's plot, winding up hospitalized in the process. Rather than having Chuck committed and cruelly removing the thorn from his side forever, Jimmy instead cares for Chuck and returns him home, seeing Jimmy's compassion not as a reason to bury the hatchet, but as an opportunity. Chuck plays off of his brother's sympathy to wheedle out a confession.
You do realize you just confessed to a felony?
I guess. But you feel better, right? Besides, it's your word against mine.
But it's not his word against yours, Jimmy. Chuck recorded the conversation, has it all on tape. But before we hop over to Season 3, where the El Dude brothers really start to duke it out, let's catch up on what Mike was up to this season. Wisely cutting ties with the walking midlife crisis that is Daniel Wormold, Mike soon finds himself employed by Nacho Varga, Tuco's right-hand man who has little desire to wind up a punching bag of the maniacal gangster. While Nacho proposes simply whacking Tuco, Mike instead utters the first of many of his iconic "Now here's what you're gonna do's," and easily entraps the hothead, sending him to prison to avoid incurring further Salamanca repercussions.
That all you got? Get on the ground!
Best laid plans and all that, Salamanca repercussions are exactly what he gets, when the villainous Hector Salamanca sets about threatening Mike into recanting his statement in order to reduce Tuco's sentence. After spending Season 1 babysitting the worst of New Mexico's criminal players, watching Mike match wits with heavy hitters like Hector and his nephews is an effective raising of the stakes, and do I even need to say it? Watching Mike just carefully, methodically do his Mike stuff was enthralling in Breaking Bad, and it's just as enthralling now. He's a master in his criminal craft, and whether he's spelling out the details to a fellow collaborator or wordlessly putting his plans into action while you watch the gears tick, it's just so much fun to drink it all in.
You wanted to put the cops onto Hector? Why? You are nothing to him. He forgot all about you.
I haven't forgotten him.
After ripping off Hector and attempting to get him into hot water with the police to get back at him for his harassment campaign, Mike ultimately decides to break his no-kill rule since arriving in Albuquerque, setting out to snipe the bastard after a Good Samaritan winds up a casualty of Salamanca's drug smuggling network. Mike's latest addition to his quick-scope compilation is interrupted by a mysterious stranger and a note. Don't. Who could have left such a message? Rearrange the first letter of each episode this season for your answer. Rick F. Bangs. Who is this mysterious new Rick Bangs character? And could he possibly have ties to Gus Fring's drug empire? Only Season 3 can answer.
You care to elaborate?
After severely voiding his vehicle's extended warranty, Mike finds the tracking device his stalker has been using to keep tabs on him. With a little finessing, he's able to get his gang stalkers to walk off with a tracker of his own, eventually deducing the identity of Hector's anti-violence activist, Los Pollos Hermanos restaurateur, Gustavo Fring.
It's not in my interest for Hector Salamanca to die at this time.
Gus recognizes Mike's value as an unaffiliated associate the cartel can't link to him, and offers to launder the money Mike ripped off Hector last season in exchange for Mike continuing to cause trouble for Hector's supply routes. When Hector's drug distribution network is busted by the feds, he shakes down Gus and forces him to carry his product for him. Though, of course, this winds up being a just-as-planned sort of thing. And when Gus's methods prove so much more effective, the cartel puts Gus in charge of Hector's former position. As always, it's neat to watch Mike do his thing, though Season 3 is more of a setup season for the character. Season 2 is the highest highs of Mike working independently, and Season 4 is the highest highs of Mike as a fixer for Fring. But to keep things interesting, he and Gus aren't the only ones in screwing with the Salamanca's land. With Hector desperate to reclaim a drug shipping route of his own, he intends to intimidate Nacho Varga's law-abiding father into using his upholstery business to smuggle coke across the border. Knowing his father will go to the cops and meet a violent end at the hands of the cartel shortly thereafter, Nacho intends to engineer Hector's demise before the proposition can be made by switching out his heart meds with sugar pills and letting his dicky ticker do him in. Poor Hector. Everybody is ganging up on him this season. What did he ever do to deserve this kind of treatment? You know, besides everything. There's no love lost between Mike and Hector, so he goes for the whole I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you angle that's just as phony as when Batman does it, providing tips to Nacho to make sure the pill swap goes off without a hitch.
You get caught, it could get worse.
You don't think I know who I'm dealing with?
No, I don't.
As a fan of Far Cry 3, I had anticipated Michael Mando's performance in Better Call Saul as soon as the cast list was announced, and while he mostly served as a quest giver for our leads in the first 2 seasons, the long-awaited expansion of his role in Season 3 is a boon to the series. He's incredibly savvy, but always behind the 8 ball due to the constant stream of utterly ruthless players that happen to stroll through the door of the El Michoacan restaurant on a daily basis. However, his genuine, hard-edged criminality does well to distinguish him as his own character, and prevents him from slotting into the role of Jesse Pinkman 2.0, which would have been an easy trap to fall into given both have similar narrative roles. I think the best way to describe the distinction between the two characters is this: if Jesse were luckier, he'd have gotten out of the drug game, taken up woodworking, and raised a couple of kids. If Nacho were luckier, he'd still be in the drug business, he'd just be running it like Gus Fring instead of being a henchman. Nacho's storyline this season also manages to have some nail-biting moments. Looking at you, pill swap sequence. Despite the outcome of his storyline being the most predestined of all the storylines, given this is a prequel series. On a first watch, there is some ambiguity about all the Better Call Saul original characters' fates. For all we know, Chuck and Howard are still alive when Breaking Bad ends, shaking their heads disapprovingly at the news that Jimmy McGill is wanted in connection with several dozen murders. For all we know, Jimmy and Kim are still together through the events of Breaking Bad, and he mentioned frequenting prostitutes just as part of his whole Saul Goodman shtick. But it's pretty obvious Hector's going to wind up confined to a wheelchair, and Nacho is most likely going to wind up in several different places in the deserts of New Mexico. It's a sign of how strong the execution is that there's still palpable tension to Nacho's increasingly high-stakes life of crime, despite the outcome being all but a foregone conclusion.
Hector, this isn't personal. It is! It is personal!
Speaking of foregone conclusions that are nevertheless thrilling to watch play out, with Jimmy's felony confession on tape, Chuck sets in motion a plan that will end in Jimmy's disbarment. Spoilers, it didn't work. Although I was incredibly amused by fan theories when the show first aired that Chuck's plan would work, Jimmy would get disbarred, and then Jimmy would legally change his name to Saul Goodman to get around the disbarment, because technically Jimmy McGill was disbarred, and that's why his name is Saul. I'm not a lawyer, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure changing your name wouldn't fool the fucking State Bar of New Mexico. Anyways, knowing that the tape won't hold up in court, Chuck instead uses it to goad Jimmy into committing another felony, breaking and entering, in a paranoid effort to destroy the tape, assuming it will hold up in court. As always, Chuck is only half right about his brother, and instead of sneaking in under cover of darkness while a private eye lies in wait, Jimmy kicks the door down to curse out his brother to his face.
Oh, my brain used to work. I'm sick. I don't know what to do. Asshole! No wonder Rebecca left you. What took her so long?
Regardless of the time of day, he's fallen into Chuck's snare, but manages to wriggle his way out of it in the signature episode of the series, Chicanery, where he causes Chuck to have an emotional breakdown at the bar disciplinary hearing by planting a battery on him and proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that his EHS symptoms are entirely imagined.
He'll testify he planted this fully charged battery on you over an hour and a half ago.
Hour and 43 minutes.
An hour and 43 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Babineau. And you felt nothing.
The episode really draws you in. The 45-minute runtime flying by so quick that I didn't even realize we'd spent almost the whole thing in the courtroom on a first viewing. And, well, initially it seems like the battery plant is all they really need to do for everything to fall into place. You realize on a rewatch just how many minor details needed to go right to engineer Chuck's meltdown. From the deliberate grasping for straws failed Perry Mason ploy by inviting his ex-wife, to some reverse psychology to get Chuck on the stand, and the tape admitted as evidence. The episode is a masterpiece, and Chuck's motive rant that concludes the episode has gone on to copy pasta infamy for good reason. It really is the show-stealing moment of a show-stealing episode, paying off the simmering truth of his condition after 2.5 years of build-up.
And he gets to be a lawyer? What a sick joke! I should have stopped him when I had the chance.
With Chuck painted as the villain to the bar, Jimmy walks away with a 1-year suspension, and both McGill brothers spend the rest of Season 3 enduring the consequences of their double-sided Pyrrhic victory in court, lying to themselves like they're just gonna walk that shit off, when in reality, their lives will never be the same. Despite not practicing law and Kim only having a single client, Jimmy refuses to break the lease on their office, since he finally got a taste of their dream life and can't bear the thought of being forced to let it go. Instead, he wheels and deals to make ends meet. First by producing commercials for local businesses that he can air during ad time he's already bought, and second by attempting to force an early settlement of the Sandpiper case by turning the entire retirement home against sweet old class representative Irene, and convincing her it's because she's holding out on a deal.
They've all turned on me.
Who has?
My friends.
What? No.
The latter scheme is one of Jimmy's best. It's disgustingly ruthless, but in a blackly hilarious way where you're both laughing and feel awful for laughing. And in the end, Jimmy is undone by his compassion yet again, giving up his quick $1 million payday and his reputation in elder law to set things right. The former scheme with the ad time, though, I'm not crazy about it. If I'm being honest, it's probably my least favorite Jimmy arc of the series, mainly because it doesn't explore all that much. His struggles in amateur commercial making aren't particularly hilarious or anything, and really the only thematic punctuation to the 3-episode storyline is that all this struggling to do things above board culminates in him pathetically going right back to slip and fall schemes to seal an ad buy deal.
Go. Sorry about that.
So part of my problem with the arc is a plot structure, plot momentum one. Better Call Saul seasons actually do have a bit of a repeated structure, even if most people don't notice it. Essentially, each season boils down to a 70-30 thing, with the first 70% of the season focusing on more lighthearted, slow-paced Jimmy antics, and the final 30% shifting gears to a faster-paced, higher-stakes plot that unfolds rapidly. So Season 1, front 70 is the Kettlemans, then the back 30 is Sandpiper and the truth of Chuck's betrayal. Season 2, front 70 is Jimmy's struggle to fit in at Davis and Maine, back 30 is the Mesa Verde number swap. Season 4, front 70 is Jimmy running cons to make ends meet, back 30 is his ploy to win reinstatement. Season 5, front 70 is the heyday of Saul Goodman and his increasingly wacky clientele, back 30 is Bagman and the fallout with Lalo. You get the picture. And you can also see how Season 3 breaks the mold. It's front-loaded with the heightened drama, climaxes with chicanery in Episode 5, and then the second half of the season is the characters wallowing in the wasteland of their own poor choices.
If it's not real,
Then what have I done?
My other problem with this arc is what the writers do with Kim, or more accurately, what they don't do. I'm not asking for relationship turmoil to be pulled out of thin air for the sake of cheap drama, but there are multiple sources of natural conflict between her and Jimmy that are completely left on the table until season 4. In fact, Kim is written like a frickin' saint this season. You swapped the Mesa Verde numbers? That's okay, Jimmy, as long as we never talk about it to anyone. Oh, you talked to Chuck about it to make him feel better and he caught you on tape? That's okay, Jimmy. In addition to running my busy solo practice, I took the time to research case files, and as long as you don't do anything, Chuck can't use the tape against you. Oh, you broke down his door and got arrested despite my warnings? That's okay, Jimmy. In addition to running my busy solo practice, I will aid you in your defense. You got disbarred for a year? You know what? Keep your money. Sugar Mama's got you. I'll continue to pay the rent on our apartment and pay for this office space neither of us are actually using because it would make you feel bad to move out. Jimmy really has been a handful this season, and Kim's ability to take it completely in stride is odd. I assume this season is the source of some viewers' confusion later down the line, where they assume her character perpetually serves as the show's moral bedrock, even in seasons where she's engaging in increasingly blatantly unethical acts. In season 3, she's Miss Perfect. Even a potential source of moral dubiousness on Kim's part gets brushed aside. Where previous seasons presented Chuck's condition as public knowledge in Albuquerque's legal community, and engineering a meltdown of a mentally unstable man could be seen as something of a dick move, now Chuck's condition has been retconned to be hidden from the world. Instead of losing sleep over shafting her former colleagues, she now has a perfectly rational argument for why HHM has any hit to their reputation completely coming to them, while also still feeling just guilty enough that we know she's still a paragon of virtue.
All Jimmy and I did was show the situation for what it is, and if you are hiding that from your clients, well, Howard, that's on you.
Now that Chuck's condition has become a secret to the world, a strapped-for-cash Jimmy takes the opportunity to stick it to his well-off sibling who has caused him so much trouble by tipping HHM's insurance company off to his mental health issues. Just as Chuck was making strides to return to normalcy, with a publicly humiliating demonstration that his condition isn't real as a solid push to get the ball rolling, now HHM faces a massive insurance premium hike if they keep the partner with questionable mental stability on board. Chuck demands Howard sue the insurance company, and when Howard gently suggests Chuck retire, Chuck sues HHM instead. Howard calls Chuck's bluff to call HHM's bluff, dipping into his own personal funds and loans to pay Chuck off without bankrupting the firm. I don't blame the guy. Jimmy stole our latest whale, he's harassing our class representative, and now Chuck is demanding our sue our own insurance company. I have had it with these McGill brothers.
Thank you for gathering. I have some bittersweet news to share. I'm sorry to say, but our fearless leader, Charles McGill, will be leaving HHM, effective immediately.
Just like in the first season, there's a sick sort of diluted hope to Chuck's recovery. For all of his conniving and nastiness, it's easy to buy into the misty-eyed belief that overcoming his ailment might make him into the role model and mentor the Better Call Saul cast once falsely believed him to be. But the sad truth is Chuck's supposed illness was the last thing destroying his personal relationships and career. Everyone in his life was incredibly accommodating, and the only person seeking to take advantage of the situation was often himself. So even with complete recovery on the table, Chuck finds his rampant Chuckness has left him with no post-recovery life to go back to. No friends, no family, and your decades-long partner just handed you $9 million of his own money to fuck off. So, with no future in sight, Chuck has a heartbreaking relapse, ripping his home apart looking for the slightest source of electricity before collapsing, defeated, and ending his life by setting fire to the detritus with himself inside. Again, despite all his villainy over the years, it's a heartbreaking scene, and also a tough character to say goodbye to. At the time, it was hard to imagine the show without Chuck's presence. And while it is sad to say goodbye to Michael McKean's compelling performance, which was snubbed by the Emmys just like the series always is, I think we can all admit Chuck at this point was worth more to the rest of the world's character development dead than alive. Chuck may be gone, but his presence lingers posthumously throughout season 4. I've rarely felt a dead character's shadow loom larger.
He always seemed so strong. But he wasn't. I think he did what he did because of me.
Given the dismantled status of Chuck's torched home and the forced retirement that preceded his death, it doesn't take long for Howard to jump to the correct conclusion that the fire was no accident. Much like the follow-up to the plane crash in Breaking Bad, which several characters felt entirely responsible for without knowing others secretly had a hand in it, Howard is none the wiser that Jimmy sicked the insurance company on HHM out of spite. Jimmy had every intention of cutting ties with his brother forever, and Chuck's final, insincere confirmation that he never cared all that much about Jimmy only served to seal the deal. But learning he set in motion a chain of events that led his brother to take his own life, surely he's at least feeling a sting of remorse. Actually, no. If anything, the shocking theory Howard posited seems to shake Jimmy out of his funk. If he's feeling any pain toward the loss of his relationship with his brother, or the death of his brother, or just guilt from his culpability in what happened, he's certainly not showing it. He intended to prevent his brother's disapproval from harming his self-image forever, and he's not going to let a little thing like Chuck's self-immolation interfere with a relationship conclusion that was planned as absolute.
Yeah, I don't think about Chuck. Okay? I don't miss Chuck. Chuck was alive, and now he's dead, and that's that. Finito. Life goes on, so sue me.
Kim is raring and ready to go to provide whatever emotional support Jimmy needs, taking Howard to task for his innocently inappropriate efforts to undo the damage he imagines he's solely responsible for by making nice with Jimmy. But she's more distraught by Jimmy's utter lack of distress over his brother's sad fate than she would be to see the man she cares for in painful, if understandable, emotional turmoil. In contrast to Walter's desperate attempts to deflect his obvious guilt after the Wayfarer 515 collision, which were played for blackly comedic laughs to take some of the second season's traumatizing edge off, Jimmy's flippant attitude is not intended to imbue the series with levity. His propensity to go all done with fish towards someone he was once close to, even after such a shocking development, doesn't take the edge off, it twists the edge deeper. And it's not the last time he'll demonstrate a callous ability to drop people like they're hot and never look back.
Besides, it's just Chuck. Well, say what you want. A man could write a letter.
Sorry.
Hey. Well, have a nice life, Kim.
Jimmy's carefree affirmations that everything's going just peachy make Kim uneasy, and the gulf between the two only grows as their career paths diverge further and further throughout Jimmy's one-year suspension. Taking a job at a cell phone store, Jimmy finds himself unable to resist a good hustle, and soon starts buying prepaid burners in bulk, then reselling them as drop phones on the mean streets of ABQ, all under his former Cicero alias, Saul Goodman. Meanwhile, Kim finds herself bored and disillusioned with the endless grind of bank expansions. Although I think your bank models are cool, Kevin, and don't let anybody tell you different. Wanting to reinvigorate her passion in her line of work, Kim begins taking on pro bono public defender work, helping those who can't help themselves. You might think this is headed in a cliche direction. Kim's karma meter is going up, while Jimmy's is going down, and soon they'll be incompatible. But the real conflict is a lot smarter than that. In order to make more free time to continue her pro bono work, Kim joins the firm of Schweikart and Coakley and brings Mesa Verde along with her, crushing Jimmy's spirit. He had this whole girlfriend hypothetical question thing of how long would you wait for me to wake up if I was in a coma, but with how long would you wait to reopen a law office with me instead, and Kim didn't even hold out a year. And then he ropes Kim into a scheme to get his bodyguard Huel out of some hot water with the cops by fabricating a story that he's a hometown hero, creating the illusion that his trial will become a PR nightmare and a circus more trouble than it's worth to host.
I have one question for you, Miss Erickson. Are you prosecuting Santa Claus?
Your Honor?
Because it looks like Miracle on 34th Street in here.
Instead of the two drifting further apart, the absurd and infectiously fun plot puts a spark back in the relationship as they rediscover their shared passion for running cons. However, that this is what puts a spark back in their relationship doesn't sit well with Jimmy. He may have sworn off letting Chuck's disapproving voice worm its way into his head, but he can't help but suspect the next person he's closest to is harboring similar, uncharitable ideas about the kind of person he is. You're the kind of lawyer guilty people hire. You're slipping Jimmy. When he fails to mention his brother at his reinstatement hearing, he's denied, and all the subtle doubts and frustrations from both sides of their relationship that have been seeded throughout the season come messily spilling out. It's one of the most true-to-life couple fights I've ever seen on screen. It's not an overwrought end-of-Act 2 instigation to a temporary breakup, but an understandable confrontation that's been years in the making. It also has that perfect touch where some of Jimmy's frustrations and doubts are perfectly justified, but also in the heat of the moment he's directing unwarranted anger with his current misfortune at Kim without any real justification, just blind lashing out. It is a gripping shouting match.
There you go. Kick a man when he's down.
Jimmy, you are always down.
Despite the momentary hostility, it's clear the two have feelings for each other that transcend the tribulations of Jimmy's no-good, very bad year, and the two make one final push to get Jimmy reinstated via appeal in the Season 4 finale. My personal favorite episode of the series, Winner. The episode opens with a flashback to a karaoke bar where the HHM staff celebrate Jimmy passing the bar. Noticing Chuck is about to make a goodbye so Irish its name ought to start with an O, Jimmy invites him on stage to sing The Winner Takes It All with him. While initially reluctant, Chuck eventually steals the mic and finally indulges in the fun. The Chuck haters read this scene as just, look at Chuck, always out to steal Jimmy's thunder, but really it's more of a successful con. Jimmy's most kind-hearted and innocent con to date, tricking his reclusive, uptight brother into finally cutting loose and having some fun with the people he works with, Picard at the poker table style. Just like how he made strides to goad his brother back into the legal world in Season 1. 4 years of learning to hate Chuck's guts, then they drop this blissful moment of brotherly love on us. That's just great.
Play by the rules. The gods may throw the dice.
In the present day, Jimmy sits on an HHM scholarship board selecting candidates, championing a student who was once busted for shoplifting but has since turned her life around, for obvious reasons. Unable to sway the board, he gives his preferred candidate what is intended to be a motivational pep talk to let her down easy, but the undercurrents of vindictiveness are all too apparent. He's despairing at the prospect of not having his law license reinstated, but if he does miraculously pull it off, it's clear that Gimme Jimmy, the lawyer you could trust, is now fueled by as much envy and spite as his late brother, just without the legal inhibitions.
And the higher you rise, the more they're gonna hate you. Good. You rub their noses in it. You make them suffer. Remember, the winner takes it all.
And at the end of the day, he wins the day by insincerely appearing to be as sincere as the hearing panel wanted. Hey, hard to feel like he's the bad guy there. He was sincere the first time around and they didn't accept it. If you wanted a show, say less. Give him the old razzle-dazzle. The unexpected sucker for this little performance is Kim Wexler, relieved and touched at what she believes is Jimmy's true feelings, only to learn she fell for the flim-flam flummox. Despite his touching words about bringing pride to the name McGill, Jimmy's first order of business after being reinstated is to pick up a doing business as form. All his drop phone buddies know him as Saul Goodman, so presto changeo.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.
Of course, the man who would be Saul's storyline is only half of what makes Winner such a winner. But I've got a lot of underground ground to cover on Mike and Gus's storyline before I gush about the crushing and magnificent ending. As we know from Breaking Bad, Gus isn't in the meth business or the money business, he's in the revenge business. And he's none too pleased with Nacho when he learns the young upstart nearly denied him his opportunity to play with his food. With the truth of Hector's stroke as blackmail, Gus can now use Nacho as a mole within the Salamanca operation.
From now on, you are mine.
But Secret Agent Nacho won't have any serious assignments until next year. In Season 4, it's more about Mike, and the project he's overseeing, the construction of Gus's underground meth lab. It's a common problem with prequels that they assume backstories are inherently interesting just because they're backstories, the assumption that lore is interesting regardless of context. So it's a triumph that Mike overseeing a clandestine German construction crew building an underground meth lab is fascinating as all get out. I enjoy every aspect of it. The peculiar and amusing concept of building a tiny town to house a construction crew that they cannot leave under threat of death.
A whole tiny town.
There's the obvious continuation of Mike's meticulous nature, the Sally Port, the guards on top of guards and security cameras, but also the accommodations to keep the rowdy Krauts appeased. There's the needlessly tense scene, executed like a detonation is inevitably going to go off wrong when it never actually does. Real anti-Hitchcock stuff. I dreaded a bang that eventually went according to plan. And in the end, the one to fly the coop isn't the hot-headed Kai, but the affable Werner. Some people thought the character was a fool for breaking out and expecting to live, but he fires back that he knew Mike would begrudgingly forgive him. And Mike would, if it were up to him, and I believe even Fring would, through gritted teeth, if very specific circumstances hadn't arisen with the arrival of another Salamanca in town. The final goodbye where Mike realizes the most humane thing he can do is capitulate and finally be the one to pull the trigger is heartbreaking.
There are so many stars visible in New Mexico. I will walk out there to get a better look.
The whole construction side plot is such an odd, unique, fascinating storyline. Building this pseudo-prison to both contain and entertain the inhabitants while they do your dirty work. It tickles that little part of your brain that fantasizes about living off-grid in a van late at night, until you realize how much you like a hot shower and snap out of it.
Guten Abend.
If I didn't make it clear, Season 4 is art. And with Jimmy adopting the Saul Goodman persona and Mike killing in the name of the Fring Empire against his own wishes, both men have made major decisions they can't come back from. So, in conclusion, I have one stupid nitpick. Gus goes to all this trouble to find an underground lab engineer without revealing the details of his grander operation. Flies them to Denver, they drive a drop car to the middle of nowhere, put a bag on their head, then get loaded into a truck, travel 6 hours, and then as soon as they get out of the truck, he immediately introduces himself by his full name.
Gustavo Fring. Es freut mich, Ihre Bekanntschaft zu machen.
If I were Mike, I would have slapped my head so hard my hair would have come back. You're going to all this trouble to conceal your employer's location, only for him to immediately open with his incredibly distinctive name, which would also reveal the location of the construction site with a quick Ask Jeeves, since he's a well-known public figure tied to a specific geographic region. So yeah, all in all, Season 4 has some of the strongest character work I've ever seen. Gorgeous cinematography, and one of the most emotionally impactful finales of all time. But Gus should have introduced himself as Mr. X or Mr. Pink or something, so overall, probably 3 out of 10.
South wall pouring concrete? What's he up to, man? What's he doing?
We got a little tease of Better Call Saul's big bad guy, Lalo Salamanca, in the final 2 episodes of Season 4, but Season 5 is when he officially joins the main cast. It's clear the character is intended to make a big splash, and thanks especially to Tony Dalton's performance, the character eventually will leave quite an impression. But I'll admit I found that first impressions made me nervous. The writers go about establishing Lalo's importance by tying him to minor lore bits from Breaking Bad, Star Wars prequel style, which feels a tad hokey. Remember Hector's bell? Lalo's the one who gave it to him. Remember Domingo's nickname, Crazy 8? Lalo's the one who nicknamed him that. I was half expecting a scene where Lalo runs into Walter White in a Target menswear section. Boxer briefs? No, amigo. You gotta get the tidy whities. For the support. So while his arrival kinda loses import by the import the writers try to force, once the season gets into a groove, the character is a solid addition. There's a lot of talk this season about characters getting in the game when it comes to getting tangled up in cartel business, but the amusing and terrifying thing about Lalo is that the game seems like an actual game to him. Whether he's putting on the charm or committing wanton murder, he's having the time of his life. And even when he's on the back foot and losing, he's oddly tickled by his enemy's tactics. The prospect of having $7 million stolen from him and facing life behind bars doesn't seem to bother him. Just another entertaining development that he's confident he can contend with. Lalo's arrival also gives Nacho plenty of material for the season, as Nacho now has a dangerous player he needs to win the trust of and keep tabs on in order to prevent Gus from going to his knee-jerk family murder tactic.
No mames. Oh, look at that. He's a fool, right?
So the much-anticipated Lalo has come to town to screw with Gus's operation, and the much-anticipated Saul Goodman moniker has been slapped onto Jimmy McGill's freshly reinstated legal practice, now specializing in criminal defense so he can represent his drop phone customer base, because, frankly, target-rich environment. And now, in its 5th year, Better Call Saul has finally become what I think most people expected when the series was announced. Week after week, tune in to watch Saul Goodman give some sleazy client the best, shadiest criminal defense money can buy.
Legal services for the other half.
So my brother's little problem?
His record will be cleaner than Doris Day's greatest hits. Catch you on the flip-flop.
It's all a lot of fun, watching Mr. Goodman churn through his enormous backlog of scumbags, much to the perplexed horror of his former colleagues who once knew him as Jimmy McGill, with the culmination of the silliness being his montage of obstructive actions to save a crotchety old man's house from being bulldozed by none other than Mesa Verde. He's actually put up to this by Kim Wexler. Failing to find a satisfactory settlement for the man they're evicting, and unable to convince Mesa Verde to relocate their call center to another vacant plot they own, the upstanding legal genius Kim is finally faced with her first no-win scenario. Her solution to the Kimbayashi Maru is, if you can't beat the grumpy old man, secretly join him, unleashing her legally unethical terrier to latch on and never let go. Keeping with that metaphor, she's unable to call off the dogs at the end of the day, and Jimmy proceeds with their plan to soft blackmail Kevin with a copyright infringement claim on Mesa Verde's logo, along with a whole host of slanderous class action ads to boot.
Mr. was standing there with his pants down, bare genitals.
Yep. My dad never, ever did anything like that.
Stunned that for a second time she was out of the loop that Jimmy was running a scam and wound up on the receiving end, Kim feels like the sucker once more. But rather than cut things off, the two get married, shielding her from being compelled to testify against him in the very likely event he'll at some point wind up on the wrong side of the law.
Do you have the rings?
We
didn't do that.
No rings. Okie dokie.
It's a nice enough beat to wrap up the storyline on, though certainly ground the show has covered before, albeit less dramatically. But all the Saul Goodman showmanship to win himself clients and win those clients shorter prison stints, I mean, those early episodes making up the first half of the season are a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but they're a bit inessential and not quite as deep or thematically rich as the season that preceded them. In fairness, it's a tough act to follow. Season 4 was like 10 straight hours of mainlining Kino. The unlikely exception to this is Howard Hamlin, whose road towards self-improvement runs in the opposite direction of the show's leads. The handful of scenes that put him in contact with either Kim or Jimmy are enthralling, as he thinks he's dealing with the Season 2 versions of these characters and doesn't realize how far they've come, mostly in bad ways, since then. With Jimmy reinstated, Howard's out to recruit him to HHM, in a too little too late gesture to make amends for having neither the heart nor the gumption to stand up to Chuck when he barred Jimmy's entry to the firm. Howard recognizes that this job offer isn't going to fix anything, but still aims to do right by Jimmy, or right as he can all these years after the dust has settled.
And I could have given it to you. When you got barred, or when you brought a sandpiper, both times. I should have shown some backbone. It would have been the right thing to do.
Wow. I am glad you had this cleansing moment of clarity, Howard. Good for you.
Jimmy becoming not only insulted, but downright agitated by Howard's offer is a perfect insight into the way the circumstances of his life have shaped how he sees the world. Jimmy lives in a world where nobody ever forgives, nobody ever forgets, and no matter how hard you try, they are never letting you in. So it's no surprise Howard's earnest effort to apologize boils his blood. Why should Howard get to learn his lesson, say he's sorry, and be forgiven? Whether it's real or imagined that everyone, everywhere will never see him as anything more than Slippin' Jimmy forever, how is it fair that someone else should expect to get a second chance? So instead, he politely takes time to think on the offer, then secretly torments Howard while stringing him along, throwing bowling balls through his windshield under cover of darkness, and paying prostitutes to embarrass Howie at a business meeting. Jimmy finally expressing his resentment toward Howard at the courthouse when he's confronted over all his pranks is essentially the sequel to his winner takes it all speech from the season 4 finale, exploding into a tirade that betrays how this Saul Goodman crusade is a vindictive effort to stick it to the man to bolster his own self-esteem. The funny thing about that is that the man in the Better Call Saul universe is Clifford Maine, Howard Hamlin, Kevin Wachtel, all people with flaws, but certainly not villains.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of. I'm so far beyond you. I'm like a god in human clothing. Lightning bolts shoot from my fingertips.
Exploring another character's flaws, we have Mike, who has turned to the bottle to cope with killing Werner, a man who he respected and whose company he enjoyed. The whole alcoholic Mike arc in the first half of Season 5 was Better Call Saul's biggest miss for me, and it comes across as a stalling tactic more than anything. With Mike shooting Werner at Gus's command, Mike's character journey effectively ended. He crossed that one line he wouldn't cross, acting in defiance of both his morals and his tactical judgment, and sealed the deal with a bullet. He's Gus's right-hand man now. He's Breaking Bad Mike now, with all the dirty business that entails. Journey complete. But staring down the barrel of 2 more seasons, the writers wanted to milk some reluctance out of Mike before having him go all in, choosing to do so by having the character perpetually liquored up out of grief. The adage goes, write what you know, so a lot of writers, unsurprisingly, explore alcoholism, which means I've seen a lot of shows tackle the subject with nuance, humanity, and creativity. The Drunk Mike arc, by contrast, is very on the nose, very cliche, and very not Mike. Mike is and always has been a power fantasy, wish fulfillment character.
Take my gun from me. I'll make it easy for you.
You can make it not so easy.
Like Batman, his competence to defeat the opponents he's pitted against is rarely in question, and the best material surrounding the character instead explores his ethics, boundaries, and justifications for his actions. His plot in 5-0 to build up the persona of a drunk after his son was murdered, all to catch his son's killers off guard and kill them with his own hands, while still being racked with guilt as he pinpoints past decisions that he justified at the time but which eventually made him culpable in his son's death, was also perfectly in tune with the character of Mike. But now he's out getting wasted, bullying his granddaughter, making a scene at bars, picking fights with street toughs. What's the point of this? What am I supposed to be getting out of this? I understand that he's gutted by the sad fate of the kind Mr. Ziegler, but Mike is not Jesse Pinkman. I don't want a half-hearted demonstration of how pained he's supposed to be over what happened last season with excessive boozing to sell us on his distress. I want to know how he feels about Gus disregarding his advice. I want to know how he feels about Werner, a sad casualty, but still someone who was quote-unquote in the game and aware of the risks. How much blame does he put on those 2 men? And how much blame does he put on himself? Does he put any on himself? Or is he just wallowing in self-pity and feeling like a victim of circumstance more or less forced to pull the trigger? Failing all that, I at least want to see him building up a rapport with Nacho, Gus's informant. Better Call Saul will eventually showcase Mike's efforts to rescue Nacho from his high-stake mole role, and beautifully, subtly tackles his reaction when he is ultimately unable to do so. But since the 5th season devoted an excessive amount of time to Mike throwing back shots, so the audience really gets that he's sad about killing Werner, his relationship with Nacho winds up a bit of a rush job as a consequence, informed more by Mike's backstory with his son than any sort of interaction between the two.
The cops won't solve this.
You got away.
While I'm on the complain train, might as well rip off the Band-Aid and get what is sure to be my most controversial opinion out of the way. You might want to sit down for this. Ready? Here goes. I don't really like Gus in Better Call Saul, which isn't to say I hate him or anything, just that from a narrative and character development perspective, he's the weakest link in the roster of main cast members. It goes without saying, over the course of Breaking Bad, the character became one of the most iconic and beloved villains in television history, and it's fun to have Giancarlo Esposito reprise the role. But so much of what made the character exciting in Breaking Bad was what he was up to, his evolving role in the story where he was this mysterious benefactor in the 2nd season, then this shoulder devil with his own agenda in the 3rd season, and finally this arch-nemesis mastermind with unfathomably vast criminal resources in Season 4, it gave audiences fleeting yet captivating glimpses into the many different faces of the dual-life leading businessman. His feud with the Juarez cartel, which managed to pump out half a dozen of the show's most iconic scenes while actually occupying relatively little screen time in the grand scheme of things, was just the cherry on top. On the other hand, in Better Call Saul, we're watching Jimmy, Kim, Nacho, Mike, Chuck, and hell, even Howard navigate this compelling character development week after week, and then Gus is just kinda there. From square one, he's every bit the Gus we've come to know from Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul doesn't explore much more than, grr, I sure do hate that Hector Salamanca, one day I'm gonna get him. A plan that ultimately blows up in his face, specifically the right side of it.
Everyone else is growing and changing all the time, and that's not really my jam. I'm more of a stoic, removed, uncomfortably self-aware type.
If he was playing a similar shoulder devil role to Mike in the series, that would at least be something, and warrant that almost inhuman, mythical persona that the character has built up. But without all the family drama tugging him toward the light side, Mike's not half as conflicted as Walter, and then once he does get fully on board, Gus spends most of their time together ignoring Mike's pragmatic advice because it's not ruthless enough, like he's secretly a Targaryen. Ironically, the one time I was like, okay, now we're getting somewhere, was the last scene we'll ever see of Gus. It's a quiet moment where he's chatting up a guy at a bar after defeating Lalo, and you get to see him cut loose a bit for once, but then an ominous scowl creeps across his face, and he leaves before the two can continue talking. An interesting glimpse at the toll dedicating his life toward revenge is taking on him. He's denying himself personal connections, and the inherent liability in them, because despite winning the battle with Lalo, he's still got a war to win. So my first complaint is that he's a bit too static over the series run, and my second complaint loops back to that unfathomably vast criminal empire I referenced earlier. Keeping Gus's empire deliberately shrouded in mystery was a smart move in Breaking Bad. Walt and Jesse were just cogs in the machine, and when that machine turned against them, it was impossible to know just how capable and powerful the conspiracy they were up against was. And while the logistics of building the underground lab made for a real winner of a plotline in Season 4, the increasing exploration of the ins and outs of Gus's empire in the final 2 seasons starts to get a bit implausible and goofy. Wiretaps and body doubles and underground tunnels and surveilling his own house and surveilling Mike so that he can save him when he gets stabbed by street toughs and then take him across the border to Mexico to treat him in yet another tiny town he's constructed. How many tiny towns is this guy gonna build?
To see what a big heart you have, is that the idea? You throw money at these people, they bow low.
Tiny town.
Running a much more lo-fi operation is Lalo Salamanca, who winds up rather hilariously subverting the trope of gangster villains tearing across town, killing anyone in their path, getting himself arrested after doing one little old murder for information. Planning to post the $7 million bail and then skip town, he sends his lawyer, Saul Goodman, to retrieve the money from the desert. Unbeknownst to Jimmy, Mike Ehrmantraut is making sure the money makes it home safe, so Lalo can be killed once he's back over the border. And when Mike saves Jimmy from getting ripped off and executed, the two wind up stranded in the desert and have to make the 2-day trek back to civilization together. Bagman is a beloved episode for good reason. Plenty of pulpy action for the I skipped all the boring lawyer parts crowd. Kim gets in the game by introducing herself to Lalo in an effort to track down her missing husband, and best of all, Mike and Jimmy finally share a storyline together. Not just a quick scene where one gives the other a job to run on their behalf, a whole episode with the two stuck dealing with each other under extremely dangerous circumstances. It's rare to find a series where the two main characters sharing a storyline together is considered a novel treat, but that's Better Call Saul for you. Mike's short but sweet, I have people speech. Whew! Baby! That's what I'm waiting for. Compelling as a reflection on how he wound up where he is, and heartbreaking with the knowledge that all he does will eventually come to light and be for nothing. Happy to have you back, Mike.
So when it's my time to go, I will go knowing I did everything I could for them.
This whole thing could have been avoided.
Shut the fuck up. Let me die in peace.
The final 3 episodes of Season 5 are really when the series' endgame comes to life. Or I guess, the first of 2 endgames, the in-color endgame. It's tense, exciting, and it gets Nacho, Mike, Jimmy, Kim, and Lalo all tangled up together in the same dangerous game. Nacho is tasked with helping hired assassins infiltrate Lalo's Chihuahua home, but before skipping town, Lalo takes a detour to question Jimmy about the suspicious circumstances surrounding his desert crossing. That scene will get your heart racing.
Did you push it in a ditch? I don't think so. You don't think so? Well, I mean, you either did or you didn't, so, which one is it?
Satisfied when Kim Wexler harshly chastises him, whom amongst us wouldn't be, Lalo accepts Jimmy's bogus story and crosses the border. The attempted hit on him winds up bloodier than Nacho had hoped, killing Lalo's innocent relatives and henchmen alike. Surviving the shootout, Lalo walks off with a cold and terrifying determination. It's clear the giggling psychopath we've been watching all season has just been rocked to his core. The game's not fun anymore. He's headed north, and this time, he's playing to win.
Si hay una prueba. Sé dónde encontrarla. Adiós, tío. Me va a ver pronto.
Lalo on the warpath seems to be the order of business when Season 6 kicks off, given that was the big cliffhanger of the Season 5 finale and the big cliffhanger of the season premiere. But after interpreting a monumental amount of direction from Hector's dinging, Lalo drops off the face of the earth for almost half the season. After leaving the audience wondering, what's he up to, man? What's he doing? For a month, Secret Agent Lalo suddenly pops up in Germany, tracking down the widow of Werner Ziegler, so he can start pulling the single loose thread of Gus's operation he found for all it's worth.
Didn't talk much about his work. It was very secretive.
Yeah. Sure, they must have told you something.
A seduction, a sneak-in, amputation, and interrogation later, Lalo makes surprisingly short, yet, I'll give the writers credit, pretty plausible work of locating Gus's dig site. Hiding in the storm drain, Lalo waits for the SS Gussie to float down here so he can snatch the chicken man to his death. Spotting a cockroach on a pipe, he gets an even better plan. I'll get to that later. In the fallout of the shootout at his home, there's another character on the run, Nacho Varga.
Anybody see you?
No.
Keep it that way. You're in Salamanca territory. Everybody's gonna be on the lookout for you. And I mean everybody.
With the Salamancas and the Federales scouring the country for him, Nacho's on the move. Following the directions of Fring's henchmen, he soon realizes he's outlived his usefulness, and Fring is more interested in getting him killed in an engineered Salamanca shootout to tie up loose ends than he is getting him back across the border so he can hand Nacho his trophy for Mole of the Year. It's tense and thrilling to watch Nacho still keep his wits about him and manage to survive with the deck so thoroughly stacked against him. But he quickly realizes it's a losing game, and instead decides to go out on his own terms. If Mike can guarantee his father's safety, he'll turn himself over to Gus, give whatever story Gus needs to cover his ass to the cartel higher-ups, then die a quick death by gunshot during an escape attempt to spare him further Salamanca torture. For a character who's been a dead man walking for several years now, Nacho's final screw you to the cartel is a pulse-pounding, triumphant scene. Partly because in the back of my mind I found myself hoping against hope he'd miraculously find a way out of it, somehow, but mainly because somebody finally got the last laugh on Hector Salamanca. For all the awful, sadistic antics he's been up to throughout the series, it's always a shame to remember that Hector gets the last laugh on Gus Fring in Breaking Bad. So watching Nacho torment the treacherous Tio, then cash out before he can do anything about it, is a fitting comeuppance to Better Call Saul's longest-running foe.
So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me, you twisted fuck.
Still, Nacho's death is a tough watch, especially after his final call just to hear his father's voice one last time, even if the conversation is short and uneasy. If you're still sore about what goes down in the desert, feel free to rewatch Breaking Bad. Everyone present is destined to meet extremely violent ends. Mike informs Nacho's father of his death, promising the Salamancas will face justice, but his father is uninterested in getting caught up in the cycle of revenge that consumes gangsters, instead choosing to accept the fact that his son is gone. There's neat parallels between Mike and Nacho's father, sure, with the former consumed by avenging his son, but there's also a lot of similarities between Mike and Nacho. The Ehrmantrauts and the Vargas are both pairs of father and son, one corrupt and one virtuous, just switch which is which. At first I read Mike's admiration for Nacho as a foreshadowing of his mentorship of Jesse Pinkman, sorta like he's a son to him, but in Season 6 the dynamic came into focus and I realized he admired Nacho because he did what Mike wishes he could have done. Instead of sacrificing the innocent loved one trying to convince them to go along to get along, he sacrificed himself to save them. In hindsight, I'm surprised it took me this long to see it. Nacho's father and Mike's son shared incredibly similar take this bribe convincingly or die circumstances.
Even looking like you're doing the right thing to those two meant that he wasn't solid, that he couldn't be trusted.
I'll talk to him. He'll come around.
I don't trust him.
Pretty heavy stuff. But on the lighter side of things, we have Jimmy and Kim. Kim resigns from Schweikert and Coakley at the end of season 5, much to Jimmy's concern, but it turns out it's so she can join him in his escalating prank war against Howard, much to Jimmy's nervous excitement. The logline of the season is, Jimmy and Kim are going to ruin Howard's reputation, so he'll be forced to settle the Sandpiper case. And the exact details and endgame of the scheme are deliberately kept from the audience, Ocean's 11 style. At the end of the day, the plot boils down to Howard hiring a private eye who is secretly working for Jimmy, who will show Howard photos of Jimmy bribing a look-alike of the judge in the Sandpiper case. When Howard accuses the judge of being compromised, the photos will be switched for innocuous ones. It's not a bad scheme, though I will admit some of the tension is deflated by Better Call Saul tipping its hand prematurely that the plan will succeed without a hitch. This being the last season, there's an innate ominous aura to all the proceedings that a horrifying left turn could happen at any minute. But I was soon confident nothing shocking would go down until after the Howard scheme was finished. It was really nothing more than the awfully convenient word choice Howard uses when confronted about strange goings-on that tipped me off. He could blow up the whole operation by spelling out exactly what Jimmy and Kim have been doing to mess with him, but instead when he talks to Clifford Maine or his wife, it's just vagaries. Okay, I got it. He phrased it like that, so whenever they do whatever their plan is, and he goes, I'm not crazy, nobody will believe him.
I do have a problem. Just not the problem you think. I have a Jimmy McGill problem.
Jimmy McGill?
You'll have to excuse me.
Howard!
Again, plan itself is fine as far as it goes, and the episode where everything comes to fruition is an absolute joy. My problem is with how spread thin the first half of Season 6 is. Season 6 was extended to 13 episodes, and when all is said and done, I don't think the writers needed the time. The first 4 episodes all revolve around Jimmy and Kim engineering events to make Howard look like he uses cocaine in front of Cliff Maine, so that once the plan goes down, they'll have sown the seeds of doubt and Cliff won't back Howard up. Plant drugs in his locker, trick the Kettlemans into believing his peppy attitude was a byproduct of Florida snow, then steal his car while he's at therapy, and toss a prostitute out of it in front of Cliff. Sounds like the makings of another classic Better Call Saul montage. But it isn't a montage. Each of those bits is an entire episode's plotline. I'm all for exploring the meticulous details of a criminal caper, but we're in the final season here, and I started to itch for some real plot and character development. It's like if there was a 20-minute scene in Ocean's 11 showing how they got their hands on one of the Bellagio's chip carts. Like, yeah, it's part of their plan that they need a chip cart, but did we need to see it in that much detail?
They've been switched. Somehow he switched them.
Howard?
No, Jimmy. He snuck in somehow, and these are not the pictures I saw.
Fortunately, following up on all that setup chicanery is the strongest hot streak in the show's entire run. The hat trick of plan and execution, point and shoot, and fun and games. Over the course of those 3 episodes, Better Call Saul shows off every facet that has made it such an excellent series, playing the hits back to back and better than ever. Plan and execution showcases the last of the fun, goofy capers Jimmy and Kim indulge in together as they walk Howard into their trap and win the Sandpiper money that's been 6 years in the making. Howard chews them out afterwards, pinpointing their true motives. Scamming people is fun. Before he can make good on his promise to uncover the truth to the world, the presumed dead Lalo steps through the doorway, casually shooting Mr. Hamlin in the head. The cliffhanger is masterfully executed, so expertly uneasy that it actually turned my stomach on a first viewing. Point and shoot is wall-to-wall crime thriller tension, as Lalo tasks Kim Wexler with assassinating Gus Fring while he holds Jimmy hostage, then sets off to uncover the underground lab while she makes that distraction. Kim's fate hangs precariously in the balance like never before, and the episode concludes with a gunfight in the underground lab between Mr. Fring and Mr. Salamanca. Nice plan, Lalo. Unfortunately, I'm in Breaking Bad. Fun and Games comes along to cap it all off, another illustration of Better Call Saul's well-established examinations of evolving relationships, growth, change, and regret. Jimmy attempts to convince Kim that one day they'll forget everything awful that happened, but nobody is walking away from that the same. Howard's death is staged as him taking his own life due to cocaine abuse. Kim quits the law, HHM downsizes and is renamed, and McWexler splits up. Kim lamenting that she could have prevented everything with her knowledge that Lalo was secretly still alive, and instead chose to hide the knowledge from Jimmy so they could keep running their scam on good old Howie.
Because I was having too much fun.
With Kim out of his life, the show jumps to one final flash forward. Now embracing the sleazeball persona full-time, Jimmy McGill is living life as Saul Goodman, marking time until Heisenberg walks through those doors under the alias of Mr. Mayhew. Those string of episodes are nothing short of spectacular. Really, the only nitpick I can think of is that the plant to the payoff that allows Gus to defeat Lalo could be more organic. A couple episodes earlier, he's walking around the lab and he looks around and thinks to himself, this seems like a kind of place where an awesome showdown would happen. I should stash a gun here. How did you know that, Gus? What's that on your computer? Is that the script?
You done?
No. Not yet.
So that's it for Better Call Saul. In the past. Caught up to the Breaking Bad timeline, the final 4 episodes take place years after Walter White's death and Jesse Pinkman's escape to Alaska. With a fake identity as a Cinnabon manager, Jimmy now lives as Gene, and after being ID'd by cab driver Jeff and his pal Buddy, he ropes the pair into a heist to rip off a department store at the mall he works at. With this first full-fledged Gene episode, Nippy certainly lowers the show's tempo, although there is a segment of edge-of-your-seat tension as the robbery unfolds, since we're in the endgame now and anything could happen.
You okay?
It's an endearing little caper. After years of miserable black and white cold opens kicking off each season, we see Jimmy finally get his mojo back, and spare himself from being turned in by Jeff and Buddy with some mutually assured destruction to boot. It's safe to say dropping all the trappings of the series, especially after the hot streak that preceded it, left some audiences cold. No Kim, no Mike, no cartel, and no real indication where things are headed next, and if this was just a one-off and the conclusion of the Gene storyline already. Nippy has its haters, but I'm firmly in the love it camp. If you hate Nippy, you know what? More for me. Well, I guess, bandwidth permitting, there's sort of just unlimited Nippy for everyone.
After all that, a happy ending.
Well, Nippy had the vibe of Jimmy McGill doing one last job to save the day, bolstering his confidence and happily remembering the glory days in the process. The following episodes are a cynical follow-up where reality comes crashing down. One fun little caper going to plan doesn't make for a happy ending where suddenly all your problems are solved. After calling Miss Wexler for the first time in years and getting an icy reception where she suggests he turn himself in, Jimmy impulsively kickstarts a new criminal enterprise. He tracks down rich marks at bars and gets them drunk, Jeff the cab driver hands them drugged water on the ride home, and Buddy steals their personal details and bank info while they're knocked out. Along the way, there are flashbacks to Jimmy's ill-fated decision to get tied up in Walter White's burgeoning criminal empire, and his final terse farewell to Kim, as well as a parallel story of Kim confessing to Howard's widow the truth of Howard's death. With these haunting reflections on past decisions that spiraled into utter calamity, there's this dreadful sense that everything is hurtling toward an ugly end. And on top of all that, Jimmy's going about this identity theft scam incredibly recklessly, practically begging to get caught. When he forgoes the scam to rip off a cancer patient and just does an outright B&E, Jeff winds up behind bars, and Jeff's mother Marion puts 2 and 2 together and deduces Gene is Saul Goodman. Betrayed by his soft spot for the old folks one last time, Jimmy is unable to cross the line of harming Marion into silence, instead allowing her to contact authorities on her life alert and taking us into the finale.
There's a criminal standing in my kitchen threatening me. He's a wanted man, and his name is Saul Goodman.
All right, Marion, I'm calling the police. I'm calling right now.
Jimmy's attempts to elude the cops are incredibly short-lived. Sitting and holding, he has a breakdown over finally being caught, especially under such undignified circumstances, before tapping into his inherent showmanship and hatching one final plan to get himself out of hot water.
Where do I see it ending? With me on top, like always.
Presenting his cooperation with Walter White as coerced via threats, Jimmy is able to talk his 30-year plea deal down to 7.5 years, to be served at the same cushy prison that housed Bernie Madoff. However, he's stunned to learn that Kim actually did confess to her involvement in Howard Hamlin's disappearance after he challenged her to do so over the phone, surprised that she would prioritize the truth and closure over saving her own skin. Planning to follow her lead, he feigns that he plans to testify against Kim Kim to get her in the courtroom, then nukes his own plea deal by confessing to his crimes. How he enabled Walter White and facilitated the empire that would claim and ruin so many lives, how he indirectly caused the death of Howard Hamlin, and how a vindictive act on his part in the heat of the moment led his brother to end his own life. No more talk of, one day you'll wake up and realize you can forget. The phrase Jimmy has been clutching to like a lifeline all season. You know what happened, and it's finally time to live with it.
And I'll live with that.
Now sentenced to 86 years, Jimmy is more or less going to face the rest of his life in prison. But moved by his confession, his relationship with Kim is finally on the mend. His fellow prisoners are enthused to be in the presence of local celebrity Saul Goodman, and Jimmy and Kim share a cigarette together like the good old days. And with good behavior, who knows? It's admittedly a bit of a corny finale, though to paraphrase Jimmy after his first bar hearing, a little corny, but they mean every word. This is not just the end of Better Call Saul, it's the end of the entire Breaking Bad universe, so a little extra sentimentality is warranted. Even the most black-hearted among us will find it easy to swallow, because for all his schemes, plots, and criminal conspiracies, Jimmy was never the most black-hearted among us.
Guess, that's it. Quite right, huh?
So that's Better Call Saul. There's so many characters and dynamics and shifting relationships that it's entirely possible someone could adore aspects I complained about and complain about aspects I adored, but still love the package as a whole just as much as I did. It's the end of the world of Breaking Bad and also an emotionally evocative exploration of the canonical start to it all. But was it the start to it all? For that, we'll need to take a look at the real early days of James Morgan McGill, the animated masterpiece, Slippin' Jimmy. No, I'm just messing with you. I'm not watching that shit.
But my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. At night, when the bars close down, Brandy walks through a silent town and loves a man who's not around. She can still hear him say, she hears him say, Brandy, you're a far